Mr. Fredrik, nice to meet you. My name is Alex. Thank you for being here. Thank you for joining us, and welcome back to Kyiv. I heard that you recently just returned along with the European Union advisory mission. Can you tell me about this, how the decision of returning here was taken?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be on your show. So I arrived in Kyiv yesterday together with 12 colleagues. We drove from Poland, from Rzeszów, where EUAM now has its temporary headquarters. So when Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine on the 24th of February, the mission evacuated. We went to Moldova, and then we went to Poland to set up our operations there. But now we have assessed that the security situation in Kyiv is good enough for us to start our return. This is a gradual return, so I'm part of the pioneers, so to speak, and then next week we'll have more colleagues coming, and the week after more colleagues. So the idea is that by the end of the summer we'll basically be, most of our international colleagues will be back in Ukraine. Of course, our local Ukrainian colleagues, many of them stayed throughout the war and are still here in a sense. So, this is the mission coming together again as a team in Kyiv.
This is talking about Kyiv, but as far as I know, you have your mission continue to work at the borders throughout the whole time of the full-scale invasion.
Exactly. So, when the invasion happened, or when Russia invaded Ukraine, we evacuated, like I said. So the mission's mandate is normally to support police, prosecution, security service, and other law enforcement agencies with reform to help them move closer to sort of EU standards. But obviously with the war, this was not possible because everybody was completely focused on defending Ukraine against Russian aggression. So what we did was, once we evacuated, we shifted our activities, and then one of the main things that we did was exactly to focus on the borders, like you say. So we've been sending teams of advisors and experts to the border crossing points between Poland and Ukraine, Slovakia, Ukraine, and Romania, Ukraine, in order to facilitate first the flow of refugees out of Ukraine. Obviously now people are starting to come back as well. And also facilitate the flow of goods into Ukraine, humanitarian and other types of goods which Ukrainians need during this war.
How this facilitation worked? Because at the end of the day, we still have all the tax systems and border guards, and they need to check it. They need to check correct documents for all the people fleeing Ukraine. As far as we know, again, in between European Union, there are no borders. They are, but they are not as at the same level as we have in between Ukraine and European Union. So, if I understand you correctly, this crossing the border process were eased somehow.
Exactly. So I think obviously whenever you cross a border in or out of the European Union, there's a bureaucracy that you need to deal with. So partly I think the Ukrainian government reduced this bureaucracy, made it easier bureaucratically to leave and enter. And so the role of EUAM was really to be on the spot on the Ukrainian side of the border, to solve problems, to facilitate, to coordinate to some extent aid coming into Ukraine, to just make sure that people were able to leave and come back, and also goods were able to enter Ukraine in a very easy manner.
Obviously, from the name of the mission, it's advisory mission. It's understand that the mission is giving a lot of advice to Ukraine law enforcement facilities and services. But since the Russia invaded Ukraine, the EUAM also provided some assistance. Can you tell about this more?
Exactly. So when the war started, we not only focused on this border support activity, we also took all our project money, which was allocated for different types of projects, and we said, okay, look, let's stop with this and let's find out what our partners in Ukraine need most. What is the sort of the essential needs that they have. So we have allocated, I think it's 1.6 million euros to buy first aid kits, for example, for the police and for the State Border Guard Service, for the security service as well. We've also bought food rations, these sort of food packs that they need now, basically in this very difficult situation. We also, like you said, we also bought communication equipment, so handheld radios and these sorts of things, just to help our partners deal with this war. What we've also been doing is talking to other EU actors. There's the Prava Police program as well, and we've also been, together with them, allocating several million actually for sort of these types of emergency support packages as well. So, everything from protective equipment, helmets and bulletproof vests as well, which is in very high demand, of course, and other types of emergency equipment that we've been procuring for our Ukrainian partners.
Apart from some caskets and vests, the other assistance, the other help, has it been particularly requested from the Ukrainian side, or have you been doing your case study, what we need right now, or that was a pure decision by the European Union?
Look, I think it's a combination of both, because we're in constant contact with our partners, and in this dialogue we discuss what their needs are, and then we see how we can best facilitate those needs. So Ukrainian law enforcement agencies have provided very long lists actually of needs. So we've been able to identify specifically how we can provide for some of them. But then what we've also done is take these lists and send them back to EU member states. So we've helped also EU member states provide this type of emergency equipment through the mission and also directly to Ukrainian partners.
Oh, that's great. Have you succeeded in something? Have something been provided by the other European country members?
Yes, I mean, I think member states have provided a massive amount of equipment. And now I'm not talking about the military. I think everybody in Ukraine knows very well how much weapons, heavy weapons, ammunition has been provided to the Ukrainian armed forces. But then there's also this type of equipment that we deal with, like these protective, these bulletproof vests, helmets, communication equipment, and also many member states have also been very forthcoming in providing this as well.
Let's quickly start with the mandate, the initial mandate of the EUAM, because for me that was kind of opening. I just found out that the mission is assisting with reforms in law enforcement services. When it started and how the European Union decided to implement, to organize this mission and send it to Ukraine, to Kyiv?
Sure. So we were launched in 2014 after the Revolution of Dignity and Russia's annexation of Crimea and the invasion in the east. There was a decision by the European Union to deploy a so-called CSDP mission, we're a crisis management mission, with a mandate to support Ukraine's law enforcement agencies' reform. Because what had happened, especially during Maidan, just a few hundred meters from here, was that you had the security forces going in very brutally and actually killing protesters, as you very well know. And so there was a collapse in public confidence in the police, in the security forces. And for a healthy democratic society, you need to have a police, you need to have security forces with a lot of legitimacy. And this legitimacy comes from public trust and confidence. But this wasn't there. So we were deployed to reform these agencies, to work with them, to help them adopt EU standards, to help them with equipment as well, to provide training, to provide strategic advice. And we've also been advising on legislation to make sure that legislation is very much in line with European standards. And through this type of reform, we're not only helping Ukraine move closer to the European Union, but also rebuilding this trust that's so important for these agencies to be legitimate and effective in society.
What percentage of this public trust in police our national police in Ukraine reached since the mission has been launched?
Well, I think it was very low in 2014 and it's been sort of steadily increasing. I think there's still room for improvement. But having said this, I think during the war now, public trust and confidence in law enforcement agencies has increased quite dramatically because obviously many of the agencies have taken a very direct role in defending Ukraine against Russia's aggression. And with this, I think they've established a lot of trust and confidence within the population. But they've also been carrying out very normal, regular law enforcement functions, like the police evacuating people, for instance, or now we see a massive effort by the prosecution, by the national police, to investigate war crimes and crimes against humanity. And this is also something that we are helping these agencies with. So I think to answer your question, we've seen sort of gradual increase, but definitely room for improvement. But this is also why we're here, why we're staying, why the EU as such continues to be extremely committed to Ukraine to make sure that Ukraine moves ever closer to the European Union.
I guess among Europe, the highest level of public trust in police is in the northern countries, such as Finland, Norway, Denmark, Sweden. And I guess we haven't reached that level just yet, but with your assistance and with our hard work, most probably we will manage this. But how can you compare now Ukrainian police today to the police in some European countries, or if you can rank it, Ukrainian police on the 10-point scale?
It's difficult to rank. I probably stay away from that. But like I said, an enormous amount has happened since 2014 in terms of reform. I think if you go back to 2014 and look at the police and other law enforcement agencies and you compare it to today, you wouldn't recognize it. I mean, so much has happened in terms of really modernizing these agencies and rooting out corruption and these sorts of things, and building trustful relationship with the citizens of Ukraine. But still, more needs to be done. As well. So I think there's the legislative part of it, where you need to have very good laws that are in line with the European Union acquis, the sort of the European standards and norms and best practices. But then it's also a question of how these agencies function as well, how they operate, and they need to operate according to principles of good governance, and there needs to be proper oversight. But one thing I really like to highlight here is that this question about trust is really about how these agencies relate to the citizen, the individual citizen. And I think historically in Ukraine, the ethos has been, these law enforcement agencies have been about protecting the state against the citizen. The citizen was a threat and you had to protect the state. But what's happening now is a complete reversal of this. So it's much more about protecting the individual rights of the citizen. And I think this is where trust and confidence in these agencies really comes from, in a sense. So one example, we've been promoting community policing, for instance, for a number of years. And this is a concept which many EU member states uses. And this is about a police officer being very close to the citizens and, just walking on the streets and talking to citizens and getting to know them. You have your local police officer somehow.
Just an average day, not only during mass events.
Exactly. So, being part of the community somehow. And through being part of the community, they not only build this trustful relationship, but they also become better police officers because they get better information about crimes or potential crimes. They get a better understanding of the community they live in and work in and so on. So I think everybody benefits from this sort of an approach.
But usually we have this police of dialogue present during mass events. How are they operating during mass events? How they are communicating with people? What are their main subjects of work?
Exactly. So you mentioned the dialogue police officer. So this is another concept that we've been working on, the EUAM has been working on for a number of years. So this relates to public order. And again, I refer back to Maidan and what happened on Maidan, where the Berkut went in a very extremely brutal way and beat up and killed the protesters, civilians on Maidan. So instead, we've been helping the police develop this European model of public order, which is much more built on dialogue, on de-escalation, on trying to have a graduated approach to the use of violence. And so the dialogue police officers, what they do is they're specially trained to go out and speak to the participants in mass events, in demonstrations, even before they begin, to establish, a trustful relationship and maybe agree about how a protest march will walk, which streets they will walk on and so forth. And then also during the event, be able to discuss with the organizers if problems arise, or, get the organizers to maybe somehow talk to some of their protesters to reduce the violence if necessary. So it's very much about having a very human exchange nearly. It's not rocket science. It's about really being a very, good human being as a police officer in a sense. Being able to speak to the citizens, the people you're supposed to protect. Basically.
To extend empathy and to be a good listener as well.
Exactly.
So this Scandinavian approach of trying to prevent the situation from escalation. I know also there is a way they use to block the protestants before starting the fire or any other violence against protesters, and this refers to some car blockage, right? So they're using vehicles to block the protestants, or how does it work? And I guess the mission also helped Ukraine to implement this in Ukraine, right?
Yeah. No, so sometimes when you have a demonstration and a counter demonstration, you need to separate them, and you mentioned vehicles, for instance, but I mean, there's obviously many ways of doing this. But I think the European approach is very much about, not needing to have so many police officers in full riot gear, but instead trying to talk to the sides, trying to defuse tensions proactively, preemptively, as well, to make sure that you don't get these clashes. Just a couple of examples. Obviously, in Odessa, you have a few very important dates in April and May where you have protesters and counter-protesters. So over the years, what we've done is, before these events, we've actually invited both representatives from both sides to a round table to discuss with them, to build a little bit of trust, to establish the routes and how we can solve problems on the day and so forth. And this has been quite successful. So in recent years, there's been much less violence or even no violence as well. And I think this European approach has really contributed to this. And another example are the pride marches in Kyiv and in other cities, where we've also been advising the police. And I think in the past few years, we've also seen here that the police has not used as many police officers for this, and they haven't needed to use as many as well, because a few years ago, I remember, you had this ring of steel, as it was called. So the demonstrators were completely surrounded by riot control in very heavy protective gear, which, it doesn't have to be like that in a way. So I think through this European model, you can reduce tensions, and then you can reduce the numbers of police as well, and very heavy equipment. But at the same time, I mean, don't misunderstand me. There's obviously sometimes a need to be very forceful as well from the police side in order to, defend the demonstrators who have a right to demonstrate, or prevent violence, or arrest people who engage in unlawful activities as well. So the European model also has that approach as a backup, but the first approach should be dialogue, should be diffusing tensions, should be reducing violence to the extent.
But this would be already a reaction, not the initial action. The reaction for the action of protesters. Yeah, I agree with you. So it's prevent, assess, act, right? It's work everywhere was for the reducing. For the preventing from escalation the situation. You also mentioned today about the prosecution mission, right? Now we have started to register and to investigate the international war crimes, the crimes against humanity. Karim Khan, the head of prosecution in the international court from Den Haag, he said that he is sending prosecutors to Ukraine to help our prosecutors to register and to work with the investigation. And I also know that mission is assisting with this as well. how the mission is assessed? Are you providing some prosecutors from Europe? Are they coming here to work along with our Ukrainian law enforcement, or any other way, or just advisory?
Exactly. I mean, this war has revealed some absolutely horrendous atrocities, and I'm thinking about Bucha and Irpin and Mariupol, of course, and other places. Actually, a couple of weeks ago when I was here initially, I visited Bucha and Irpin, and it's absolutely shocking. I mean, what you see. So what the mission did was look at how we can support the Office of the Prosecutor General, the National Police, the regional prosecutors and other law enforcement agencies deal with international crimes, because it's a major priority for Ukraine, understandably, but also for the European Union. It's a massive priority in this context. You know, holding those individuals who commit these crimes accountable. It's just very much about accountability. So our mandate was actually changed, was updated. So now we have a very specific mandate to support Ukrainian law enforcement agencies in investigating and prosecuting these types of crimes. And I'm talking about, you know, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and so on. So we have a team already in the mission of about 12 experts and advisors who are focusing on this, and now we're recruiting many more. So we will have quite a large team of European prosecutors, of police investigators, of military analysts, other types of analysts, experts on sex and gender-based violence, and so on. And what we would do is we will support the prosecution and the regional prosecutors. We will be embedded with them, and we will help them, advise them, mentor them, and support them in different various ways, also with training, for instance. Because investigating and prosecuting these type of crime is very particular. You know, it's thankfully it's not something which, you know, you have to do on a daily basis. But so there are very few people who have, you know, proper good experience of this. So this is what we're doing now. We're hiring experts and advisors with experience from working with war crimes in other conflicts, and, you know, they will be in Ukraine. And so we will hopefully be sort of embedded with the prosecution and the regional prosecutors as well, to sort of support them, stand next to them and support them in this extremely important work. Because, I mean, as you know, I'm sure, I think the prosecution has so far identified more than 11,000 cases of war crimes. So it's a massive amount, and I'm sure more will be uncovered as more territory is liberated from Russian forces as well. I think there's maybe close to 10 EU member states now that have launched their own investigations into war crimes being committed in Ukraine. So there are a number of parallel tracks. And you mentioned the ICC as well. I think the European Union is one of the strongest supporters of the ICC. So I think we're seeing this extremely important effort with many different actors. The EU supporting this also in other ways as well. You know, Eurojust, Europol, obviously the delegation here and others are also very much involved in supporting Ukraine in these investigations. One very important aspect is gathering evidence in a proper way so that it can later be used in court. And this is something which we're also helping the prosecution, the regional prosecutors with, because there's an incredible amount of evidence coming out, but it's also very time critical, and this evidence can disappear, be destroyed, or if it's not gathered in the right way, it can't later be used in court, and this, you know, then the case falls apart in court, which is obviously, you know, not what we want at all. So this is also something that we're helping the prosecution with, this sort of evidence gathering. I think it's very interesting because we see a lot of civil society organizations, a lot of citizens actually gathering evidence by filming atrocities, filming crimes, by posting it on social media and so on. And now I know that the Ukrainian government has launched a number of websites as well, where you can upload these films or upload other types of evidence, which is very good as well, of course. So we're working together with this.
In different fields, yeah, against cultural, historical heritage, against people. But you mentioned that we might be recovering more and receiving more such cases upon liberating the whole territory of Ukraine. Can we make some comparison maybe to other situations? Is it a statistic that after the war, after the victory, there are plenty more crimes being discovered?
Well, I mean, I don't know, but I'm presuming so, because if we see, for instance, what's been happening in Mariupol, I think, there's sort of prima facie evidence that civilian targets have been, targeted, for instance. So I think as Russian forces are pushed back, we will see more evidence being uncovered. I'm pretty sure about this.
Again, welcome back to Kyiv with at least 13 people in the mission, but what are the plans for the nearest future? Are you planning to extend more people to be returned to Kyiv?
Absolutely. So, we are the pioneers who arrived yesterday, the first 13. And then next week we get maybe another 10 colleagues, and the week after another 10. So we will be increasing the size of the mission throughout the summer, basically. This is the plan. Focus will be very much on Kyiv. Of course, this is where our main headquarters is. But I think we will also be looking at Lviv, where we have a field office. So we will also be sort of returning to Lviv, and then depending on the situation, maybe Odessa as well. We have a field office in Kharkiv, and obviously, we all had one in Mariupol, but this has been destroyed along with the rest of the devastation in Mariupol. This is really the plan now to in a gradual, phased manner, return to Ukraine. First, we focus on Kyiv because this is where headquarters is, and a lot of our counterparts are in Kyiv, obviously. But then we also intend to focus very much on the regions, and I think this is important. Obviously, this war has affected all of Ukraine. We were working in the regions before this war, but I think our work in the regions will become even more important. I mean, especially in those areas that have been liberated as well, because you see a lot of the damage and destruction. You really see this need to rebuild a lot of these places. I know a lot of hundreds of police stations have been destroyed, for instance. So, how do you rebuild those? How can the EUAM support this effort in reconstituting rule and law and reconstruction in these liberated territories?
Any further plans for changing, for updating or adjusting mandate in Ukraine?
Well, look, we'll see. I think we need to come back. We need to continue talking to our counterparts, especially in person, to understand what the needs are now exactly and what the priorities are now. Because I think with the war, they may have changed. So I don't think we will sort of automatically go back to our old tasks and activities, but we need to now reassess what the needs are, what the priorities are, how we can help in the best possible way. And then we'll need to maybe update our mandate as well at some point later this year to make sure that we can provide the best possible support to Ukrainian law enforcement agencies.
I checked out the website of the mission just yesterday, and I know that the mission had been founded not just by European Union, but also with cooperation with Canada. How Canada is taking part in helping Ukraine right now?
Well, I mean, first of all, obviously, Canada is very much a like-minded partner of the European Union and a very strong supporter of Ukraine as well, of course. So in the mission now, we have experts and advisors from 25 EU member states, but then also Canada. We have a couple of police officers from Canada who are part of the mission. So we're very happy to have the Canadians working with us in the mission. I think this is also very important to make sure that we have a like-minded partner like that in the mission.
The whole world now, at least the the majority of this, shows the unity in assisting in Ukraine in this devastating moment in the war that Russia has started against Ukraine. Will maybe some more countries join in the mission after the victory, after the Ukrainian victory?
Possibly. We have these agreements with some countries such as Norway, for instance, and Switzerland. So we're always very happy to have experts from these sort of third parties that we have these agreements with. So let's see. I mean, maybe there would be even more interest in the mission from countries like that in the future.
I guess that's it. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for joining us today and giving the answer for the important question, because people, they need to rise, they need to make their trust in police higher, they need to raise it, and we are getting this thanks to you.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here. Thank you. Thank you.
Have a good one.
Thank you.